Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The topic of our discussion tonight is to turn our attention to the second half of the videos that are explaining the basics of the introduction to economics, the introduction to microeconomics. And this follows the first video. I'm going to go through what is in the first video very quickly, simply to get some definitions built, and then we'll go into the material that makes up the second video, and then this will replace that. So I define economics as a science that analyzes how people behave under this constraint of what we call scarcity. It's a science that's the study of people making choices. That's what economics is all about. Part of it is market choices, like what you're going to buy or what firms are going to produce. But it's all about... Okay. It's all about people making choices. So it's a science that studies how people behave under what we call scarcity. And when we say it's a science, what we mean is that it is positive analysis as opposed to normative. Positive means descriptive, objective statements that are simply describing reality. Normative means you're making a value judgment. And there's a whole long example in the first video about how to think your way through that. So economics is a positive science. Positive does not mean correct. It just means a factual statement. The lights in this room generate 18 lumens. Well, that might be true and it might not be true, right? But it is a factual statement in that way. So good economic theory is positive, not normative. When you see these panels of pundits on CNN and Fox and all these other news channels, they'll have economists on, but they're making normative statements. They'll make normative statements. Like when they're interviewed, they'll say, we should raise the minimum wage, or we should tax the wealthy, and so forth. But that's not what economics is. That's them expressing their opinion on what we ought to do. So economics is clean. It's objective in terms of the study of people making choices. And then in video one, I go through all the steps in the construction of theory, and you can go back and see that. Well, just to review briefly, the way you build theory is, number one, you abstract from all the details. You focus in on things that you think are important to solve a particular problem. And those are called the assumptions of the model. Those are your factual statements about reality that you think are going to be helpful to solve a problem. What is your name?
Jared.
Jerry?
Jared.
Jared. Suppose I ask you, how would you go about identifying the people in this room who are likely to play basketball well?
Based on height?
Good. The first thing you did is abstract from all the details and focused on one thing, which is height. Why did you choose height?
Because the basket is generally
10 feet up.
Yeah.
Good. And tall people should have an advantage of being able to put the orange ball through. Good. How might Jared have reached that same assumption? In other words, what's another way you might have concluded that tall people have an advantage? Raise your hand. What? Well, tell me some sentences.
So, like professional sports, their players are actually taller?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you could have come to the same conclusion by thinking about what you've seen and then say, well, all those guys seem to be tall except for a few, so that's probably an advantage. That's good. So that's the other way you might come about it. So that's an assumption, right? And you immediately abstracted from all the details and focused in on that being a predictive statement about something. Good. Once you have the assumptions, you close the window and you simply think logically. If the assumptions are true, what does that imply? If the assumptions are accurate, what would I expect to see as a result of that? And those are called the implications of the theory. The implications are what follows from the assumption. When you see competing theories, and you're going to, by the way, see competing theories amongst the courses that you take, amongst your different faculty members. There's a theory in in psychology called Maslow's Pyramid of Needs. And Maslow wrote this in like 1953, and he suggested that the way people operate is that they have to fulfill 100% of their physiological needs before they would dedicate any resources towards the other things. And physiological would be food and shelter and procreation. And then the next, after you satisfied that 100%, then you would move on to looking at safety and providing safety. And then once that's 100% secure, then you move on to love and belonging and esteem and finally self-actualization. Well, that's completely opposite of economic theory. Economic theory says that you make substitutions all the time between these things. You make substitutions all the time. You know, he's got love and belonging above safety. Well, you know, you might give up a meal, which is physiological, in order to spend time with someone. You all with me? So people make substitutions up and down. And so that's an example of how you'll see different theories that are not consistent with each other. And what you need to do is decide which of these am I going to follow? Which of these am I going to believe is a better representation of reality? There's a very popular theory about economics, and it's real simple. It's so simple I can explain it in about five sentences. And that is, a lot of people believe that the world is controlled by a small group of men. And they are white men, and in one version they are Jewish white men, but they control everything. And there is a meeting in Switzerland once a year called a meeting at Davos, Switzerland, and it's attended by major people in industry, politicians, musicians, poets, just outstanding people in their fields. And they meet for about a week, and they have sessions where they talk about, you know, they report out on what they see as taking place, etc. There's also another group called the Trilateral Commission, and again, that's a group of people who meet periodically and talk about the world and talk about various things. But it's a very attractive, and the rest of the theory is that they control everything. They control everything you buy through subliminal advertising. It's not your fault. You just have to buy it, right? You've seen the ad and you have to buy it. And they determine all the salaries. And so if you're a woman, you're not going to earn as much as men because they're all men, right? And if you're a minority, you're going to find it hard to get jobs because they discriminate. And these are the characteristics that are usually thought of. It's a very appealing theory, because it absolves you of all responsibility for the outcome of your lives. You all with me? It absolves you from all responsibility. If you're not making as much, it's not your fault, right? Because these guys control it. And there are a lot of people who really do believe this. There are a lot of people who really do believe this, usually not college people, but lots of people out there think this is the way it works. I'm going to explain a theory that will take me 15 weeks to get through the basics of the theory. But after this theory, after the 15 weeks, you will understand a lot of things that you can look at and understand why that is happening. Or if you see this happen, you can predict this will happen as a result of it. It's a more complex theory. But this theory will imply that where you end up in your life is primarily the result of your own choices. Where you end up in life is primarily the result of your own choices, of what you do with your resources and ability and time and those kinds of things. Another aspect of this is that some people believe that success is due to luck. A lot of people believe that you're successful because you're lucky. And they think the guy who's the head of General Electric happened to meet one of the board members on an airplane, and they were wearing the same tie. And they started talking, and then that's how the guy got the job and so forth. Well, I would suggest to you the following. There is definitely luck in life. There is luck in life. Sometimes things happen that are lucky for you. But the primary outcome is the result of what you have done in your lifetime. People look at Michael Phelps as this great swimmer, and he's won like, I don't know, 20 gold medals or something like that. And people say, well, why was he able to do that? And some people would say, well, he was just lucky. he has big lungs, and he has really good, strong arms, and so it's much easier for him to compete in that way. Michael Phelps may have good lungs, right? He may have big lungs and so forth. But the reason he succeeded was that he swam for 5 hours a day, 6 days a week for like 18 years, right? Or a whole long period of time, practicing, getting a coach, figuring out how to move his hands, changing the muscle arrangement of his body and so forth. That's why he succeeded. The Beatles came out of England, and they came from a small town in northern England, and they were a hit almost immediately. As soon as they cut the first record, it was very, very successful, and it looked like they came out of nowhere, right? Like nowhere. Well, it turns out that the Beatles sang together 6 days a week in a club in Germany for about 5 years, every night, 6 nights a week, entertaining. And they got to know each other and understand, what your capabilities are and how good you are at lyrics, right? And understanding how the team could succeed. And that's why they were so successful, because they put in all that effort and work in building up that knowledge, so that by the time they came public, they knew each other really well. And as I said, they worked really well together as a team. So the outcome is really due to what you choose to do. And that's a much more uplifting theory, actually, because it says no matter who you are, if you work at it hard enough, you can succeed. You can succeed. And I've met a lot of people who have done that and overcome major problems. So we said definitions are key, and so I want to define a couple terms and then build some assumptions and move on from there. We define a good as being anything which you would like to have more of. It's a want. Anything you want to have more of, measured at zero price, meaning free. So a good is just something that you'd like to have, right? Something that you'd like to have. It includes both the material goods, which we normally think about, the car and the music and the good food and all those kinds of things. But it also includes all those other things in life that bring you satisfaction. All those non-material things, such as your knowledge, such as your physical abilities at various activities, such as your friendships, such as all your interactions with people, who, if you think about it, really probably brings you most of your satisfaction in life, right? Is your interaction with other people, friendship, love, honor, respect, and so forth. So goods are the things we want to have more of. And it's very important that anytime I say good, you include those non-material things in your thought process. You with me? Because we make trade-offs all the time, right? Like I don't work as much because I want to spend time with a friend, or these kinds of different trade-offs. It's all tied to your desires, the individual's wants and desires. I enjoy the flavor of Bombay Sapphire Gin and also the effect of Bombay Sapphire Gin. To me, it is a good, which I will have more of later tonight. But you may taste gin and think it tastes like medicine, right? So it's all tied to the individual. If I want more of it, from my perspective, it's a good. If you don't want it, it's not a good. It's a thing or something else, but it's not a good. We're going to be measuring additional units of something in a time period. So it has to be something that you want more of. You want more of. Consider the following. Suppose there was a hypothetical table when you came in, buffet table. And there's a sign that says take as much as you like, it's free, and there were paper plates and stuff. And there were different items on there, and one of them was the little English muffins, right? Little blueberry muffins, right? The small, polite ones, not the Costco muffins that feed thousands of people. But they're all there, and your name is? Anita. And Anita sees the sign. She comes in on time, and she sees the sign, so she takes 2 of these muffins on her plate and then takes it and sits down. So from the economist's point of view, is the first muffin a good? Is the first muffin a good? Yeah, because it was free and she decided she wanted it, so she took it off the plate. Is the second muffin a good? Yeah, because she took that also. Is a third muffin a good? Is a third muffin a good? She didn't take the third muffin. She only took 2. Is the third muffin a good? No, it has to be something you desire to have more of. Now, let me be clear about this thing about desire. You might want to have the third one, but you might not want to gain weight. And so you make the balance and you don't take the third one. If that's the case, the economist says you don't want the third one, right? Because it has these negative effects. You might not take the third one because there's only 20 of them there and you don't want to appear to be piggish in front of the other students, right? But for whatever reason, if you don't take it, then it's not a good. It has to be something that if given the opportunity to have it free, you would in fact take it. It would be a good, something you desire to have. And finally, we're interested just in your wants right now. Goods are just the things you want to have. What you buy is a much more complex question to ask, and we'll develop that later. But goods are just the things you'd like to have more of if they were available free. So if it gives you any satisfaction, right, you don't pay anything for it. If this thing gives you any satisfaction, then it's a good, because you'd like to have it if it was in fact free. Notice, by the way, if I change the property rights, if the sign now says, take as much as you like and take some home, and instead of plates, you have those little, styrofoam enclosures. Changing the property rights may change your decision, right? About, well, now if I can take it home, I'd get 4 of them because I can close it in this container. Nobody can see how I have to. Very good. A resource, you all studied this in your original course. There are 4 categories that are usually talked about. 3, land, labor, and capital. A resource is generally anything that can be used to produce things people want. So a resource is anything which could be used to produce things that people in fact want. Land means all of the attributes of a particular geographic location, the mineral content underneath, what is growing on it, the proximity to rivers, the fertility of the soil, the weather in that particular area, the view from that particular area. All those are characteristics of what we call land as an input. And by the way, in your notes, you want to put in parentheses natural resources, because that's the other way of talking about the same thing, natural resources or land. Labor is normally thought of, when I say it as labor, of that picture of the guy with a shovel digging, right? Labor means you visualize working in that way. I want you to broaden your category and just think of the word labor as people. People are a major resource, particularly in the production of non-material goods. So people are all around you. People are a resource. Yeah.
Yeah, because labor in economies like India is what makes that economy. That amount.
Well, manual labor is used more in less developed countries because of the fact that it's very prevalent, large populations, and capital goods, which is the next category, are very expensive for them. And so when the relative price is such that labor is much cheaper than capital equipment, you see more labor being used. And then as you get into the United States, where the population is more educated and not as large relative to other things, then firms will invest in capital equipment to increase the productivity of the people. And by having that, then your wages are much higher because you're more productive because you have the capital equipment to go with you. Within economics, the term capital refers to real stuff, buildings, equipment, software, desks, etc. If you take a course in finance, what does capital sometimes refer to? To money. Good. Within economics, if I want to talk about money, I will call it money. Okay? So it's important within our field of study that when you see the word capital, it means real stuff, not money. It means real stuff. And one that I add is time. Time is clearly a resource. When I talk about asking students what they want more of, sometimes a student will say, I want more time. And the problem is that I don't know how to do that. I don't know how you can get more time. There was a book written about 12 years ago called Vox, V-O-X, and it was the story of a guy who could snap his fingers and stop time. And it won the Erotica of the Year award because of the descriptions of what he did when he had time stopped. I won't go into all that detail. You don't need to know that. But time is better thought of, I think, as a resource, because if you think about it, everything you do uses up time. You with me? Everything you do uses up time. If you're eating a meal, if you're being here tonight, and no matter what it is you're doing, you're using up time. And time is probably your most scarce resource. And I'll talk about scarcity in a couple minutes. But it's got to be one of your most scarce resources, because you have all these things you want to do, and you have that limitation of only having so many hours per day, and so you have to adjust to them. So I make two big assumptions to form the basis of the model. The first is that humankind has unlimited wants. People have unlimited wants. They always want more. Remember, I'm including non-material goods also. So the Tibetan monk probably does not want a CD player or a BMW or even a Tesla. But he probably wants a little more hay to sleep on, a little bit better quality wine, more knowledge of the deity would be something he would desire to have. So people want more throughout history and through all across the world. It seems to be a reasonable assumption that people want more. They did a survey of people who had won $10 million in the lottery, and they interviewed them about 8 years after that, and they were asking them questions. And one of the questions are you better off now than before you won the money? 70% of them said no. 70% of them said no. They had won $10 million. But they had spent it on stuff, probably, and now it was spent, right? And now they were back to just being who they are in a much nicer car. But so I told them, I said, look, I'll volunteer for the survey, and just give me 1 million. I don't need 10 million. Just give me 1 million, and interview me every year for the rest of my life, and I will tell you, yes, I'm better off now than I was before. But people do have unlimited wants. They simply want. That's an assumption that economics makes. There's an excellent 5-minute video on Milton Friedman talking about greed. He's on a talk show, and I suggest you to watch it. It's really interesting because greed is the same point. Greed means people want more. The desire for money is not the desire for money. It's the desire for what? If you won $10 million, would you simply sit at home with all the money around you saying, I am so happy? You would do it for about 18 seconds, and then you would do what? Spend it. Good. So the desire for money is not the desire for money. It's the desire for what money could buy, what money can buy. In Venezuela today, the inflation rate, which means the rate at which prices are rising on all commodities, including wages, is 1,000% per year. Prices are going up at 1,000% per year, which means what's happening to the value of their money? It's going down, right, to 1,000th of what it was before. And so that money is not as desirable because it's losing its value. And in fact, when people get paid, the first thing they do is buy something, anything. Just get rid of the money because it's losing value so quickly. The second assumption is we have limited resources. And that's why economics is called the dismal science. Because economists are always pointing out that if you want to have more of one thing, you're going to have less of something else because you have limited resources to use. Politicians, particularly when they are running for office, always promise everything, right? Listen, elect me and we'll have full employment and we'll bring down the deficit. And prices will be low, and interest rates will be low, and the economy will grow at 10%, and everything will be wonderful. And the economist says, no, if you have more of this, you're going to have less of something, right? Because it's always a matter of trade-offs because resources are in fact limited. So we define this condition as calling it scarcity, and it means that individually, and as a family, as a city, as a state, as a society, we don't have enough resources to do all the things we would like to do. And so that's what scarcity means. It means that the amount people would like to have is more at zero price, is more than what's available at zero price. That's called a scarce good. The amount you'd like to have if it were free is more than what's available free. And so scarcity is the result of these two assumptions interacting with each other. Unlimited wants, but limited resources means I can't have it all. I can't have all that I desire. A scarce good, as I said, is defined as one for which the amount you would like to have at zero price is more than what is available at zero price. To be complete in the theory, however, there are situations where a good may not be scarce, and so we call that a free good. Clean air in Montana is a free good. There's plenty of clean air. There's some people who live there, but there's plenty of clean air. Clean air in Colorado is a free good in most areas. What about clean air in downtown LA? No, it's a scarce good, right? Very scarce. And we know that because if you look on top of the buildings, you see all these resources and equipment taking in the air, changing the humidity, filtering out particulate matter, and changing the temperature, and then circulated inside the building. So when you see resources being used to produce something, then it can't be a free good because you wouldn't have to produce it if it was that way. Good. By the way, if you ever come through the Denver airport, in the little shop they have little glass bottles, and it says "Clean Colorado Air," and they sell it. And particularly they sell it to people coming to LA, so that when you get to LA, then things are bad. You can open the jar and breathe some Colorado clean air. Good. In 1969, we sent astronauts to the moon, and it was the first time any picture had been taken of Earth from space. And some people didn't even believe that Earth was round, called the Luddites. But when this picture came back, it had a tremendous influence on people's understanding of scarcity all over the world. Because there it is. That's the whole thing. You all with me? That's it. And it exists in a vacuum where life cannot exist in space. And all the resources are just there on that one little ball in space. And it was a big impetus to the conservation movement all over the world, because people began to realize, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and the picture really says it. If you use it up today, it's not there for your kids, and if you use it up today, it's going to get more and more scarce. So let's find ways not to rape the planet. And that is the basis of what you talk about now, which is called sustainability. People try to find ways to produce things from goods that can be recycled. And that's recycled paper and cardboard and all the things that you see. And many companies are trying to dedicate themselves to that, because that is something that is desirable in the minds of the general public. So I've only derived two assumptions: unlimited wants, limited resources, and I can already build the implications of the theory. The first is people have to make choices. You have to make choices. You can't have it all, right? Every day you wake up and there are all these things you'd like to do, and you can't do them all. So you have to choose amongst them. Which ones am I going to dedicate my time and other resources to acquire? When you make a choice, economics defines the cost of that choice differently than accounting cost, which is the way you're used to thinking about things. Economic cost, and it's sometimes called opportunity cost, it's the same thing. The economic cost of any choice is the personal value to you of the next highest valued alternative that you did not do. That's what you gave up by doing that. Good. What is your name?
Anwar.
Anwar?
Yeah.
Good. Anwar, if you were not here tonight, what would you be doing during this time?
Probably working on other causes.
Good, studying, right? And so at the end of that hour and a half, you'd have more knowledge in those classes, right? You'd also have better ability to analyze because you've been using your brain to do that. And then when you meet with the professor or other students, you appear to be more intelligent, right? And then people look up to that, right? That's what you would have if you're not here, but you're here. So the cost of being here is that you don't have that, right? Good. In the blue shirt, what would you be doing? Yes. I can't hear you.
Working on another class as well.
Now, you got to choose something else. He already got that.
Okay, working another shift.
Good, working at work, right, where you work. And so you'd be earning income, right? And so the economist would say, it's not the foregone income that you've given up. It's what you would have bought with the dollars you had earned if you had been working. You with me? That's your opportunity cost. Because you're here, you don't have the dollars, which means you can't buy the things that you would have bought if you had those particular dollars. Good. Somebody else? Anybody? Yes, sir.
Playing pool.
Good. Playing pool, recreational, good, and perhaps a way of earning income, depending. I've played some in my life. And so you would have been having fun and increasing camaraderie with the people you were playing with, if they were on your team, etc. And you would have been increasing your skill of playing the game. And it's entirely possible that if you were there tonight, you would have met Suzette. And Suzette is this phenomenal girl. She speaks French beautifully. She's Korean American. Her father was American. Her mother was Korean. She's this beautiful Asian woman, and she's got a delightful laugh, and she's smart. She's smart, and so you would have started dating her, and you would have gone out, and you would have ended up marrying her, and you would have had 2 beautiful children. But you're here, and she meets Bob, and Bob marries her. Now, I like to use the example for this reason. Economic costs are sometimes not easy to estimate because they are the value to you of something that you didn't do. You with me? They're the value of something you didn't do. If I have a firm and I'm using my employees to do particular tasks, I can probably estimate the opportunity cost of doing that, and that is, what could I make if I had them doing this other project, this other kind of work. So sometimes you can do a calculation, but many times it's a very hard thing to know because you didn't, in fact, do it. The distinction you want to make is between economic costs and what are called accounting costs. And accounting costs are what you're used to thinking about as the cost of doing something. If you ask the accountant, what's the cost of going to the movie, he would say, what was the price of the ticket? $10. What was the price of parking? $4. And if he's good, how much gas did it use? 40 cents worth. So he would add up what are called explicit expenditures, what you actually spent. And he would say the cost of going to the movie is $14.40, the sum of those things. If you ask the economist, what is the economic cost of going to the movie? He would start out by asking you the same questions. How much was the movie? 10, parking 4, and gasoline 40. But then he would say the cost to you is not the $14.40. It's what you would have bought with the $14.40 if you had not gone to the theater, plus the value of what you would have done with your time for that 3 hours. Y'all with me? That's opportunity cost, right? And that's economic cost. So it's critical that you get that in your mind, that in the course, whenever we say cost, this is what we're talking about: opportunity cost, economic cost of doing something. If you ask the accountant, yeah.
Can the economic cost actually be going to negative?
Well, that wouldn't be a cost, it'd be a benefit.
Well, or become a benefit?
But then it wouldn't be a cost.
Okay.
There are benefits that flow from activities. That's true, right? And if the benefit flowed to the other alternative, then it would be a cost because you'd be giving it up, right? But if the benefit flows from doing this activity, then it's a benefit of that. It's not a cost. Good. If you ask the accountant, what's the cost of being here tonight? He would say, how much did you pay in tuition? Divide that by the number of courses you took, divide that by the number of units, divide that by the number of class sessions, and he would come up with a number. And he would say it's $142.50. If you cannot get your tuition back, if it's too late to get your tuition back, then that is what the economist calls a sunk cost, a sunk cost. And it doesn't represent a current cost because it's gone, it's sunk. The economist would say, what's the cost of being here? If your tuition is not refundable, then it's gone. It doesn't matter. What the cost is, as I talked about, is what you'd be doing with your time, the value of what you'd be doing with your time. It's interesting, after I give this lecture, the next class period, attendance goes down because you guys are coming and then you go, oh, no, I'm not going to give that up. And he's racing out to play pool, even though she's already married. In 1830, in the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, Rudyard Kipling wrote the following verse. The moving finger writes, and having writ moves on, nor all your piety nor wit can lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all your tears wash out a word of it. Y'all with me? The moving finger is time. The moving finger is time. Time moves along, and as it does, you do things, right? Moving finger writes, meaning what you did, and having writ moves on, nor all your piety nor wit can lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all your tears wash out a word of it. Sunk cost, right? There's several versions of this. Your mother may have said to you, there's no reason to cry over spilt milk. You've all heard that, right? Well, that's sunk cost, right? It means the milk's already been spilt. You can't get it back. The one I like, one of the ones I like the best is you can't unring the bell. You can't unring the bell. That's so visual to me, right? Once you rung the bell, you can't not have the bell rung. Everybody see it, right? And the corollary to that is you cannot unsay what you have said. You cannot unsay what you have said. And she reminds me of this every year around Valentine's Day, of what I said to her 8 years ago. She'll bring it up every year. Do you know what you said to me? And you can try everything. You went, no, I was stoned. No, I was on the phone talking to somebody. I wasn't talking to you. No, you were, and you said that to me. And you can't unring the bell. So she gets flowers and stuff at Valentine's Day. Good. So now we've derived a couple definitions. What did we just do? We derived some definitions of things. And now we can actually derive the implications of scarcity, meaning what things will we tend to see as a result of being in the situation of scarcity. Well, the first is real obvious. If you have scarcity, you have to make choices. You have to make choices every day. And every city has to make choices among alternatives, and every state does, and every family does, and every nation and the world. You're constantly making choices about what am I going to do with my scarce resources, and so you have to make choices. One of my students said to me one time, you have to prioritize. When you want to make choices, you have to prioritize your alternatives. And I thought about it, and if you do prioritize, you'll probably make better choices because it means you've evaluated the value to you of the different alternatives. But we make choices all the time without prioritizing, right? You make just snap decisions about stuff. Guy calls me up, are you teaching this afternoon? No. Well, let's go play tennis. So we go play tennis. And then I realize that I have to give a lecture that night and I haven't prepared the lecture. So we have to make choices, but we don't have to prioritize. But we do have to make choices. And by the way, you've all had this experience. You had something that needed to be done, and you put off doing it, and it has a deadline, and you put off doing it and put it off until time makes the decision for you, because now there's no alternatives. You with me? If you'd done it the first week, it would be done. But now it's due tomorrow, and the only alternative is to stay up all night and do it tonight. Good. So, but we have to make choices. And here's where this notion of economic or opportunity cost comes in. as I said, it's different from the other. Did I do?
Yeah.
I did that. Oh, I know why it's there. Right. The third is competition. We are in a natural state of competition because of scarcity. And I can represent that in the following way. Here I am, and I have some resources. And, you see it? And there are all these goods that I want to have more of. There are all these things I want more of. A beefeater martini, or a Bombay Sapphire martini, and world peace, and a cure for breast cancer, a cure for prostate cancer, and better tennis game, and more raw fish, sushi, and all these things I want more. Now, to represent society, which could be thousands of people or one, I can do that simply by adding you to the equation. And so here you are, and you have resources, and you have all these goods that you want to have more of, all these different things that you would like to have more of. So as a society, we have this many resources to use. This is our resource base. But if we use these resources to produce a tennis court for me, we can't use that same resource to produce a bike path for you. You all with me? If you're wearing that jacket, I can't wear that jacket. If you eat the McDonald's burger, I can't eat the McDonald's burger. If resources are used to produce things I want, they can't be used to produce things you want. Now, there's some crossovers. We both want a cure for cancer, and we both want various things, world peace forever, and so forth. But we are in a natural state of competition because of scarcity. Because of scarcity, we're in competition with each other. There are people who would argue that capitalism causes competition, that capitalism causes competition. And the answer is no, it doesn't. All over the world, there's scarcity, and all over the world, people compete in different ways, but there is competition for those particular things. John Lennon wrote a song called Imagine, and you all know it, right? And it's this beautiful song about imagine if there were no borders, and there was no money, and everybody cooperated, and there's no scarcity, basically. And the answer is no. That's why it's called Imagine, because there you have scarcity as a constraint. Good. So how do people compete? Well, there are various forms of competition that have developed over time and still exist in every country of the world. And the first is violence, or threat of violence. When cave people first came together in tribes, living together in groups, the way that things were divided was through violence. And that is, if we just killed a big animal, we'd end up fighting over who's going to get to eat it and stuff like that. The men would just find the best looking women and hit them over the head and drag them into a cave, right? So violence was prevalent in the very beginning of humankind. And violence exists as a means of competition in nature. Animals face scarcity big time. If the squirrel eats the nut, the bird can't eat the nut. Porcupines have defense mechanisms, which are the quills, right? And you see them competing in various ways. Every spring, you see the video of the male bucks butting heads, and they're fighting for dominance of the herd and who will inseminate the females in the herd. And so they fight, and then what's interesting is they don't tend to really hurt each other. They may lose an antler and have a headache, but they don't gorge each other. They don't take their antlers down and go into your side and do those kinds of things. But that's one example of it. In the pride, which is the lions living together, if a male tries to fight the existing dominant male, then they fight for who's going to impregnate the pride. And in that case, if you lose, then you have to leave the pride among lions. If you're not the winner, you have to go elsewhere, right? But violence is used in nature, and violence is a primitive form. Is violence used today in the United States as a form of competition? Absolutely. And if you want documentation, turn on the local news any night of the week or weekend at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock, the local news. Because most of the stories are all about robberies and people killing each other and all kinds of horrible, horrible stories. So violence is definitely a form of competition that does exist in society. And it differs across nations, and it also differs across the city of Los Angeles. If you live in Beverly Hills and you leave the BMW parked in the driveway next to the house with the keys in the ignition overnight, there's a high probability the car will be there tomorrow morning. And the reason is that, number one, they're long driveways. Number two, there are all these cars driving around that have lights on them and symbols on the side, meaning private security firms. If you leave a 1984 Toyota Corolla on the street in East LA for 5 minutes with the keys in the ignition, it will be gone. And my daughter learned that lesson. She just ran in to get something, came out, like, where'd I park? Didn't I park right there? No car. And they found it like 2 days later and called me, and it was impounded, and there was nothing left of it. It was just, the engine was gone, the tires were gone, everything was gone. So violence is used in differing amounts. If you think about kids in East LA, young kids like 10, 12 years old, they tend to join a gang. And as you know, the gangs use violence as the form of competition. And they're fighting for territory. And the reason is the territory generates income through the sale of drugs and the access to other resources that are there. And so a small child will probably join a gang because it's rational to do. It's rational to join a team if all the goods are being allocated by competition between the teams. You guys with me? And if you join one, then you'll know what colors it's okay to wear, right? If you didn't know, you could wear the wrong colors and then you'd be dead or you'd be unhappy and so forth. Good. I doubt that any of you own a Kalashnikov rifle, which is a Russian version of the M16. In Iraq, every family owns a Kalashnikov rifle with ammunition. And the reason is violence is much more prevalent in that area of the world as a means of competition. Y'all with me? You know that from all the stuff that you read. When we tried to make that into a democracy and we tried to hold elections, we tried to put this form of government on these people as a nation, and so people would say, okay, I'm gonna run for office, and then people would kill them. You guys with me? People would just kill them because violence is the way you compete. And so as soon as you announced as a political candidate, a lot of the candidates just got shot because that was the way they were, in fact, competing. We moved on to what's called social political competition, and that is where we compete on the basis of some limited behavior or set of rules or some limited characteristic of individuals. Winning a gold medal in the Olympics is a scarce good. A lot of people would like to win one. How do you win one? Well, there's a set of rules. Like if you're swimming and it's the breaststroke, then there are all these rules, right? You have a lane that you can swim in, and you have to wear a certain kind of suit, and you actually can only move your hands in certain ways. There are rules about how you can actually move your hands. And then you compete by speed, and the person who wins the match wins more matches and then finally wins the gold medal in that way. If it's target practice, then it's, there's rules. You have to shoot right there and then how close it is to the bullseye and things like that. So the NFL, a whole set of rules for each team. Being first place, scarce good. Whole set of rules. If you throw the ball, then you can do this, and then 4 chances and 10 yards and on and on and on. Good. So those are all examples of social political competition. Being president of the United States is a scarce good. And a lot of people would like to be president of the United States. At least they used to be. A lot of people wanted to be president of the United States. And you all know the competition. It's a limited set of activities. You're allowed to raise money and advertise. You're not allowed to advertise in the last 30 days prior to the election. And there are all these rules on how you can raise money, and there's hard money and soft money, and there's rules on how you can spend the money. And it used to be that to be a real candidate, you had to release your tax forms. You had to, because that's everybody did. So, and it was proved this time that you actually don't have to, right? The rules changed in this case. And then you all know it's not just who wins the major amount of votes. It's this other system called what? Electoral college, right? And that has this distribution thing of all the states and so many delegates and so forth. And that's how Trump won. He didn't win the total vote, but he won enough of the electoral votes to be president. So that's an example of social political competition. What is your name, Miss? Bailey. Bailey? Bailey, your friendship is a scarce good. Your friendship is a scarce good. Because you can't be friends with everybody, right? You with me? I mean, you have other things you want to do. You can't just be friends with everybody. A lot of people in here would probably like to be your friend. So when you pick friends, what characteristics do you look for?
Loyalty.
Good,
Trust.
good. A similar value structure. You said loyalty, but a similar value structure, right? People tend to want. If you're really, really tight with your values, you want friends that are also really tight. If you're slippery with your values, you probably want friends that are slippery with their values. Good. What else is important to you?
Family. Family.
Well, your family,
Yeah.
right? And their family, right? Yeah, who they are and how well you communicate with them, right? Do they speak the language? Do they use the same words that you use? Similar interests usually is something people look for, right? If you enjoy the movies, then you like to be with somebody who enjoys the movies. My girlfriend knows every film that every actor has ever been in and what role they played. And so anytime we go to the theater, the movie will start and this guy comes out and he's a sheriff. And then she'll lean over to me and say, he was the butler in this other film. I said, he's not the butler now, he's the sheriff. So, but anyway, we enjoy it. Good. But it's interesting, we all ration our friendship. We all ration our friendship because it's a scarce good. The opposite of it is we're all competing for friends, right? We're all in competition to be friends with other people. So it's an example of social political competition. Finally, society's moved on to adopt a third general form of competition called economic or market competition. And that's where we compete by offering to exchange value, bidding for things that we would like to acquire. So it's an exchange system. And we bid against each other, and the person who bids the most is the person who ends up getting that particular good. There's a beautiful leather jacket at Nordstrom's, and it sells for $500. Well, the only people who will get it, aside from the people who use violence, the only people who will get it are people who are willing and able to spend $500. Y'all with me? That's who will end up with the good in that case. So economic competition is exchanging value for the things we would like to have. Now notice your incentive then is to get better at producing value so that you have more dollars to use in competition with others. You guys with me? You have an incentive to find ways of producing more value for society, because the more value you produce, the more you can receive in exchange, and then you can use that to compete for other goods. So that's the economic or market system of competition. So every society across the world has combinations of social, political systems of competition, market competition, violence, all the different countries of the world, France, Sweden, Russia, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, Venezuela. They all have combinations of these things that are used in competition. And often when you can't succeed with one method, you may try a different method of competition. And that was my example of people running for office, trying to compete on a social political basis, and then other people using violence to overcome that. And that's where you have governments being overthrown, right, in coup attempts and those kinds of things. The Soviet Union was a totalitarian government across all of the countries, and the Central Committee determined all of the decisions of what would be produced, and there was very limited market activity because they chose to produce bombers and tanks and submarines and Olympic athletes and other ways to compete, mostly with violence, throughout the world. And they had very limited production of consumption goods. So they couldn't figure out how to get the right prices that would match up the amount people want to buy with the amount that was being produced. So their social political competition took the place of market competition. And throughout Eastern Europe for a long time, butchers had a very high social status. The butcher. This is a guy who cuts up dead animals. You guys with me? Right. But they had a really high social status. And the reason was they knew when the meat was coming in. And so you wanted to be their friend, because if you knew them, they would call you up and say, 8 o'clock Thursday, pork chops, right? And then you'd know to go to that store and there'd be pork chops there. When people would go to parties, the first question you would ask is your butcher here? Can I meet your butcher? Because goods were being allocated through this friendship, right? Social, political form of competition. France has a market economy, but they have laws that greatly restrict labor, your ability to offer your labor services, and to restrict business firms' ability to hire labor. One of the rules is once you are hired, you are guaranteed 5 weeks of paid vacation in every job. Every job. Delivering newspaper, probably not delivering newspapers, but you're a clerk in some store. You get 5 weeks of paid vacation. So you guys are all smiling, right? Like, man, that's cool, right? They almost all take it in August. France basically shuts down in August, except for Paris and the other tourist spots. But it means that if I'm an employer, if I hire you, I know that I'm going to have to pay you a salary, but I also know I'm going to have to give you 5 weeks off paid vacation. You with me? So it makes it more expensive for me as an employer to hire people because of that. There's also a rule in France that if I hire you as a full-time worker and you stay and work for 90 days, and I don't fire you in the first 90 days, I'm not able to fire you in the next 2 years, in the first 2 years. And so you have job security. You guys with me, right? Which is really nice, right? Except it means that to me, it means as the employer that you may decide just to screw off, right? After the 90 days, right? I mean, you may decide, there are ways to fire you, but it's very, very difficult to do. So the unemployment rate in France is about 12 or 15% continuously. And the reason is because of all these constraints on hiring labor. The workers are actually made worse off because of these constraints. Labor wages are not as high as they would be because I'm incurring all these other costs that come out of the fact that I've in fact hired you. Pfizer built a pharmaceutical plant 90 miles northeast of Paris about 6 years ago, and the plant is it's all capital equipment. It's all equipment. There are no employees. There's 9 guys that work in the plant, and those are the programmers, right, that run the programs. Everything is mechanized, is automated. And you guys have seen all those, you see the films, right, with the bottles going by and they're being filled, and they make 65 different drugs. They make 5 modalities, meaning capsule and patches and all this kind of stuff, and in 40 languages. But the whole thing is run, as I said, as capital equipment. And the reason is that labor is very, very expensive. The machines don't take 5 weeks off. The machines don't get sick, etc. Good. So in choosing the method of competition, one of the primary social goals is that you choose a system that is fair. in almost every one of the philosophical models of society, fairness is one of the very strong principles that almost all those systems recommend. And fair means an equal opportunity to compete. Doesn't mean equal ability, because we don't have equal abilities. It doesn't mean equal distribution, because we have scarcity, right? But it means that it's a system that you have an equal chance to succeed at. So let me ask you, what about violence? If violence is the means of competition, does that give all of you an equal opportunity to compete? No, some people are really good at violence. Some people are really strong. They have great eye-hand coordination and so forth. It's always great to ask that question, because I said, is violence fair? And all the large guys in the room say, yeah, it's fair, right? And then all the other people say, no, it's not fair. No, it's not. But let me point out this. If violence is the means of competition, then your incentive is to get better at violence. You all with me? If violence is the way you get things, in order to get more things, you want to learn how to compete better at committing violence, right? So there's an incentive in these areas of the world to be able to shoot better than other people, to be able to be good at this activity. So violence is clearly not fair. What about social political competition? In the Olympics, the swimmers have a set of rules. Does that give you all an equal opportunity to compete? Swimming. Think everybody has the equal abilities to swim? No, no. Some people love the water. Some people are afraid of the water. Some people, again, have the ability to breathe underwater for longer periods of time and so forth. So some people will be better at that than other people. If swimming were the means of competition to get goods, what would society invest in? Learning how to swim. So you'd see more swimming pools all over the place. Everybody would be trained when you're young. Learn how to swim, because that's the key to success, right? Etc. Good. But it's not a fair system. And who argues the best? That's not fair. Some people are really good at arguing. My attorney is really good at arguing because she was raised in a family that argues all the time. And so she's an expert at it. And so if I have a problem with somebody, I just sick her on them. And she just goes after him, you know, and inundates them with requests for information. And just, she's good. She's very good. So it's not fair, though. We don't all argue equally well. And grades in this course are not distributed by arguing. So I want to tell you right away, don't argue with me, because it won't make any difference. It's all what you did on the examination. Finally, I gave that away. Is economics fair? No. No, it's not. Because think about it. Some people are born into families that have a lot of wealth, right? Some people are born to really wealthy families. Some people are born to very poor families. So we don't start the game out even at that way. In the wealthy family, you know, you're 5 years old and your mother said he's squinting. What? He's squinting. And so they'll measure your eyes, and sure enough, you need glasses, right? And so your parents would provide it. And your teeth aren't straight, so we get an orthodontist to put braces on. And you have a little bit of a list, right? A little bit of a list. So they figure out you have a little scoliosis, so we put a shim under one foot and we get you to stand up straight and so forth. The people in the poor family end up not being able to see well. They have crummy teeth and they're bent over. Good. So it's number one, we don't come in equally. Secondly, we differ in our ability to produce goods. We differ in our relative ability to produce goods. There are a few people who have extremely productive characteristics. They're great at doing analytical problem solving. They have excellent communication skills. They have perfect pitch. They have perfect eyesight. They have great eye-hand coordination. They have all these characteristics that make them very, very successful at producing value for others. JFK Jr. was thought to be an example of that, John F. Kennedy Jr. Good-looking guy, really smart. He had a magazine, political magazine, very successful, beautiful wife. It turns out he was not very good at flying a small plane over the ocean at night, and that's how he went. But he had all these characteristics. So some people have lots of productive abilities. And then at the other end of the scale, there's some people with really limited abilities, right? You may have a lack of sight. You may have difficulty in hearing. You may have difficulty doing analytics. You have trouble trying to understand that. Maybe you don't have good language skills or whatever the case may be. But the majority of us are not in those tails of the distribution. The majority of us are in the middle of the distribution. So you may have perfect pitch hearing, right, and perfect eyesight, but you may have difficulty with mathematical analysis. You may need glasses, right, but you're really good at analytics and so forth, and so forth. When you grew up, your parents recognized that you were really good at solving problems between people. You were the guy on the playground where there was a fight, and you'd go over and say, okay, what's the problem? And they'd say, we both want this. And you'd say, well, let's share it. You do 10 minutes. And you were really good at solving interpersonal problems. So you specialized in that and took a degree and a PhD in psychiatry and became a psychiatrist. Can you make very much money being a psychiatrist? Dr. Phil. Right? Dr. Phil. He's a millionaire. This guy has a TV show where he is a psychiatrist. He brings on really stupid people. No, they are. They're really stupid. And then he tells them, you are really stupid. Right? Why did you let him do that? Why do you continue to let him do that? And he makes a fortune doing it. Good. Your parents realized when you were young that you had an affinity for classical music. And so they gave you training in the violin, and you learned and practiced all the way, and you became a world-class violinist. Can you make a lot of money doing that? Yes, musical instruments, Yo-Yo Ma, singing, Bono. Isn't that his name? Isn't there a guy named Bono who sings? This is probably like 20 years ago, and you guys I don't know who that is, right? But you can make a lot of money being a singer. In fact, if you're simply really good looking, right, and you can't do anything else, right, you can't solve any problems, you've got good interpersonal skills, you can make a lot of money, right, just being good looking. In the economic system, life is not fair, as we pointed out. But I would suggest it is probably the most fair of all the forms of competition. Right, life is not fair. Get over it, right? But I would suggest economic competition offers the broadest spectrum of ways that you can, in fact, specialize and compete. Maybe you couldn't do any of those things, but you could throw a little white ball really fast and make it move around. Can you make many dollars doing that? Millions of dollars, right? There's a big guy named Shaq, big as a house. He throws an orange ball through a hoop. That's what he does for a living. He throws an orange ball through a hoop. And he's made millions of dollars doing it, right? So in the market system, you can do anything. And if you do it really well, you can make a lot of money doing it. Maybe it's finding a new recipe for a hot sauce, right? Maybe it's making clothes, making music. I mean, it could be anything. And that's what you guys are all looking at right now in this period in your life. You're trying to figure out, what are my skills and what do I do well, and hopefully you're focusing on what do I enjoy doing. Because my advice to you is, when you get ready to graduate, don't take the first job that's offered to you. Take a job where you're doing something that you want to do. You guys with me? Remember, when you go out looking for a job, you're interviewing them. You're interviewing them. Is this a place I want to work? Is that a guy I want to work for, right? And that's what we're all doing, trying to figure out what to specialize in that way. So economics is about the choices that people make. Microeconomics is, micro means small. Micro is studying the decisions of individuals, both in consumption and in buying, and the decisions of firms and what, in fact, to produce. Macro meaning large, is the study of the entire economy. So when you take 161, which is macro, you'll be studying what causes inflation, what causes interest rates to change, how does the federal budget affect the productivity of the United States, and what is the role of the central bank? which is the Federal Reserve. So that's macro, but micro is what we're focusing on, and that is the functioning of markets, the interaction of exchange through marketplaces. In the society, there are different mechanisms of choice. There are different ways that choices are in fact made. Political decisions, as you know, are made with a representative system. We elect people to represent us, and then they make decisions on the allocation of scarce resources. But economic decisions are made by individuals or firms, and they're made based on your abilities and your desires and the relative prices that you face. This is the example of the young lady talking to me about India, right? Well, the relative price of labor is very low relative to capital, and so you see much more of that being utilized in that particular way. Now, this is a diagram that you want to commit to memory because this is a simple diagram of the economic system of exchange. It's called the circular flow diagram because it's showing the economic activity that takes place, the exchanges that take place in this economic system. The two economic agents are households making decisions in the marketplace and business firms making decisions in the marketplace. Households own most of the resources in the United States. The land, the labor, your labor, and the capital is owned through various organizations by individuals. Your major resource, most likely, is your labor services, which you rent out to firms and provide those to business firms through what's called the resource market. And the word market just means bringing together relevant buyers and relevant sellers of something. So the resource market is the interaction of the providers of resources, that's the households, with business firms, and the resources become the inputs to production in the business firms. In exchange, business firms pay a flow of dollars, so much per week or per hour or per month. That flow of dollars comes back to you as income. So in the economic system, the term income means the money coming to households in exchange for the use of resources. Y'all with me? So you see it labeled right there. That's the flow of dollars. In fact, notice it's a flow because you always quote it per time period. When you ask, what is your income? You would say, I'm making so many dollars per hour, or so many dollars per week, or per month, or per year. You guys with me? So you're quoting a flow. You're quoting an amount per time period is what you're receiving for giving them hours and hours of your labor services. Households have to decide in that transaction what job to take. You know, what resources do I own? Who am I going to sell or rent them to? And so that's one of the major decisions that you make as a household. Households can be you as an individual, it could be a family, it could be you and a partner, or whatever the case may be. And so they have choices to make. Business firms have to choose which inputs they're going to hire. What combination of inputs am I going to use? And with technology changing today, there are more and more alternative ways of producing goods that can be viable means of production, particularly with artificial intelligence and particularly with 3D printing, another example of a changing technology which is dramatically changing the way many products are in fact being produced. Business firms are where production takes place. And the simplified version is, think of a firm as a team of people working together, which most firms are, a team of people working together and producing goods and services in the economy. And they have to choose which inputs to use, and then they have to choose what to produce. You know, what things am I going to put into the product? Right now, all over the world, there are tens and thousands of committee meetings every day. And those committee meetings they're talking about what are we going to put into the product? What are we going to put into the product? What do people want? What things would make people happier, right? Accounting firms who have consulting firms, what tax services are we going to provide? Are we going to provide all tax services, or how will we provide it? Will we send people out as teams, or will they have to come in? And all of these questions of what to produce are made by business firms. So firms produce goods and services for sale through what we call product markets, the markets where products are purchased. A lot of it's changed now. A lot of it's online now, right? I buy almost everything from Amazon. It's amazing. I have a Prime membership. They ship me stuff. In fact, I feel bad if the UPS truck goes by my house and doesn't stop. It's like something's wrong. But 70% of U.S. production is purchased by American households. 70% of the output of American firms is sold to American consumers. So our economy is very much consumption driven. It's driven by the things that people buy domestically. The other parts are exports, which make up some of it. Some of it's sales to governments and other organizations, but most of the sales are to American citizens. And in exchange, we provide money to them when we buy the good, and that flow is defined as revenue. That's the flow of dollars coming into the firm per time period that is in exchange for selling the various goods and services of the firm. So revenue is a flow measured per time period. How much are you selling? How many dollars do you get per week, per month, or whatever the case may be? A third kind of market, which may not be in the textbook, is what we call credit markets. And that is, you have the ability to borrow and lend the use of money over time. The use of money over time. So if you want to buy a car today, you could save up $30,000 at some point and then buy the car, but you want to buy it today. So you're willing to pay a premium to get the dollars sooner. You guys with me? And the premium is the interest rate, right? You're willing to pay extra to get the use of those dollars now so you can enjoy the car now and pay them a larger stream back to the dealer or whoever you borrowed the money from. So households borrow from the credit markets for two major purchases mostly, and that is your home and your car. If you are buying groceries on a credit card and not paying it off, you're having trouble making your decisions. Mostly households put money into the marketplace during your lifetime. Most households have pension funds or retirement funds, and you have it taken out automatically if it's a private firm, or you buy stocks and bonds and so forth. So you're putting money into the market, lending it to other people to use, and your return is the interest you earn on that asset, the interest that comes back to you as the premium for somebody else using your money. Business firms tend to want to borrow early in their operation or in their expansion, because if I open a firm, I have all these expenditures just to get started, right? I have to buy the building or build the building or lease the building, buy the equipment, right? Buy all the resources that go in, pay my employees to produce even before I've sold anything, and then I get a revenue stream in the future. So in credit markets, households tend to be providers of credit in the majority, and firms tend to be the major borrowers in that particular market. The assumptions we make about these choices in fact, let me go back for a second. You can see households have two sets of decisions. Three sets actually. What job to take or what to sell. Which goods will I buy? Which goods and services will I buy? And then when will I buy them? That's the credit market. Firms have three sets of decisions too. Which inputs to use, what to produce as an output, and how to finance it in the interim. So the assumptions we make about what drives these decisions are households make decisions assuming they're trying to maximize what we call utility. Maximize utility. And utility is the economist's word for personal satisfaction over time. Personal satisfaction over time. So when you make all these choices, which car will I buy, which house, which wife, no, you do. You're making those trying to maximize your personal satisfaction over time. That's the assumption of economists. In business firms, they have those decisions to make, what to produce and what to use to produce them. And our assumption is they're trying to maximize what is called economic profit. Economic profit. They're trying to maximize the flow of profit they're earning from their activities. Profit is defined as the difference between total revenue, that's the flow of money coming in, and their total economic cost of the resources. What the resources could be used for is the cost of using them for the products that they're in fact producing. Markets, we said, are the interaction of relative buyers and sellers. There are factor markets, product markets, and credit markets. And finally, in our system, money performs a very special role because money becomes the intermediary good that is exchanged in all of these transactions. You work and give up your labor services, you receive dollars in exchange. Why are you willing to put all that effort in and only get these dollars back? Why are you willing to accept dollars? Anybody? Yes?
You do it so you can get goods that you want or satisfy you.
Yeah, great. The only reason you're willing to accept them is you're confident that you can use the dollars to exchange for other goods that you want. Everybody with me? So that's the only reason why money works, is because people have confidence that I can use that money to buy other kinds of things. Going back to the Soviet Union, they made all kinds of rubles and salaries, but there wasn't anything to buy. And so, what money was most desired was American currency, because that has value to buy things outside of the Soviet Union. So scarcity determines that there are certain questions every society has to answer. This is the last slide. Every society has to answer, has to find a mechanism to answer these questions. What will be produced in society? You have to find some way of determining that. As I said, the Soviet Union, the government made the decision. In our market, it's made by buyers voting with dollars. That's what determines what, in fact, gets produced. The second is, how will it be produced? What method will be used in society? What mechanism will be used to determine how goods get produced? And in the market system, it's up to business firms to make that decision. And because they're attempting to maximize profit, they have an incentive to do it in the most efficient manner possible. Because the more I can lower total cost by doing it better, the more potential profit I can in fact earn. And finally, every society has to have a mechanism of how the goods will be distributed. How the goods will be distributed. In our system, to the extent that it is market transactions, goods are distributed to those people who value them the most, people who are willing to pay the most money, willing and able to pay the most money to acquire the goods. And so that's the way our system answers these. When I talked about the Soviet Union and France and other countries, some of these are made in different ways than in the market system.